achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this edition of the show, we're taking a look at UFC 152 Jones vs. Belfort for September 22nd at the Air Canada Centre in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It seems like forever since we've got into a fight breakdown, and what I'm going to be doing on this episode of the show is I'm going to give you my breakdowns and predictions for the 5 main card fights. My predictions for the 7 preliminary fights will be available in written form over at kamikazeoverdrive.net, so go over and check them out and you can read them and get my predictions for the entire event that way. Now, it seems like forever since the last show. Last time we were on here, it was Strikeforce's Rousey versus Kaufman event. I had a fantastic night. I went 8-1, including a huge upset with Lamamba Sayers getting submitted by Anthony Smith, 3.5 to 1 underdog. Really capitalized on that and had a great night. So I've been doing really well of late. I don't like to brag, but I'm going to take the opportunity because when I do bad, you know, like people like to point it out. So I'm doing well right now, so I'm going to point that out. Over the last 3 shows, 28 fights predicted, 22 correctly predicted, 79% correct rate, which is pretty solid. Main events, I've won 6 in a row, and 10 of my last 12, which is, again, I'm riding a roll there and really having a good time prediction-wise. Now, as far as my predictions are concerned, you can get them here on the video. If you head over to kamikazeoverdrive.net, I had a couple of guys, Joe Caporelli and Joel Riche, who were predicting in the Joe versus Joel prediction write-ups. I've added a third individual, Josh Harper, so now it's just going to be called the MMA Prediction Panel. So 3 very well and very intelligently minded MMA fans. You can head over there and get their predictions for UFC 152 over at kamikazeoverdrive.net, and I encourage you to check these guys out. They really know what they're talking about. Now, my bet packs, they will be also available at kamikazeoverdrive.net for $10 each, and I've been as I said, I've been doing really well and making a lot of money, and I want to give you some numbers. As I said, it was 8-1 at the last event. In my last event, bet pack included 4 winning parlays. So right away, if you just copy my parlays, you won 4 different times. My confidence pack for the last show, 5 for 5. And overall, over the last 3 events, 15 confidence picks listed, 14 of them correct. That's 93%. That's pretty darn impressive. Over the last 8 shows, I am 38-0 at 79%. That's the peep. If you break in, if you buy my bet pack, you can go in, you can see my top 5 picks, and I've been almost getting them right every single time. My value list for the last show, I nailed my number 1 pick, my number 3 pick, and my number 4 pick. So those are the ones that have the most value. I feel still have a chance to win, so I nailed all 3 of them. And that, those are the big payout ones. Props last event, I said 6 props were available to bet on. I hit 5 of them. The only one I didn't get right is I said if Kaufman's going to win, might as well take her by knockout because it's the only way she beats Ronda Rousey. So that's technically the only one I got wrong, and it was more of a value play than anything else. So definitely consider buying my bet packs. Even if you don't win with my bet packs, I'm now setting up some contests, so your email address will automatically be entered into a draw. Heartandglory.com has offered a t-shirt up, so if your name gets drawn for that, you'll get a t-shirt from them. Fighter Style and Fear the Fighter are working on getting me a UFC 152 walkout shirt from one of the fighters there. You'll have a chance to win one of those. And I got a couple other things. I'm talking to the guys over at the Adrenaline Training Center trying to get some autographs, maybe from Mark Hominick, Sam Stout, Chris Ordesky, or Chris Clement, some of those guys, and I'll be able to draw those out. There'll be more details available on the website as soon as I know. So even if you don't win and have a good night, $10 could win you a nice little prize. So please check that out as soon as possible and consider buying. I think I've had a good run late and you want to capitalize on that. Also, kamikazeoverdrive.net's NFL predictions are up and running. You can check them out. We had an okay week 1, week 2. We definitely look to build upon it, so you can check them out. You can see it on the menu at the top of the website. Head over there and go check out our picks. There's all free plays. There's bet packs. There's everything you want to see there. And finally, thank you very much to all of my sponsors. It's been a long intro, but MMABettingOdds.com, Fear the Fighter, Fighter Style, HeartandGlory.com, CouchFighter.co, MMACrips.com, one of my favorite websites of all time. The Adrenaline Training Center, and the list goes on and on. But thank you very much to all my sponsors who host and post my videos. And that's enough for me. It's time to get into my first prediction of the evening. Our first prediction of the evening comes in the UFC Featherweight division as 17-5-0 Cub Swanson battles 16-2-0 with 1 no contest Charles Do Bronx Oliveira. And the winner of this fight probably finds themselves in the number 1 contenders bout up next. So this should be a barn burner of a matchup, and I'm glad to see it's on the main card. Cub Swanson, back-to-back wins over George Roop and Ross Pierson, both by TKO. Charles Oliveira, since dropping to featherweight, back-to-back submission wins over Eric Wisely and Jonathan Brookins. Both guys are very well-rounded fighters, and both are BJJ black belts. Oliveira comes in with 6 wins by knockout, 9 his biggest total by submission, and 1 by decision. Cub Swanson, on the other hand, 6 wins by knockout, 7 wins by submission, and 4 by decision. So both guys show they can win the fight wherever it goes. On the feet in the striking department, I like Cub Swanson's power. He really does a nice job against George Roop. He simply walked him down and landed that power. Against Ross Pierson, he stood in there and eventually got the shots in there, and he's very quick, and that's how he counteracted Pierson's size advantage, using his quickness to land combinations and then get in and get out. Oliveira, on the other hand, dynamic striker, lots of technique, very fast, and physically speaking, he's going to have a 3-inch height advantage and a 3-inch reach advantage, which really will help him to keep Cub Swanson on the outside and keep Cub, a state of Cub's striking range. Now, one thing with Cub Swanson that really concerns me is that he likes to try some flashy kicking techniques and some high risk maneuvers, like flying knees, spinning kicks, a lot of stuff like that. And it's great for every one that lands. Unfortunately for him, 3 miss, or 2 or 3 miss at least. And we've seen in past fights guys capitalizing on these missed high-risk maneuvers, and they result in takedowns, and that's not something you can give up against Charles Oliveira, because Oliveira, with his submission skills, he's got multiple submission wins in the UFC. He's the type of guy, you give him one opportunity to submit his opponent, and he's going to take advantage of it, and that's something Cub Swanson cannot afford. So if he makes a high-risk maneuver and it does not come through, Oliveira is going to capitalize on it. Additionally, Swanson, 38% takedown D, means when his opponents get in for a takedown, they most often get it. He's been taken out at least two times in 8 of his 11 WEC or UFC fights, and he's been submitted 3 times, of course, most recently against Ricardo Lamas. I like Oliveira's work on the ground. He'll have long limbs, should be able to tie Cub up and control him there, and I just think Cub he's a little bit too overconfident with his skills. He makes these maneuvers, and it seems to cost. He tries these moves, and it seems to cost him in the long run, and I think he's going to do that here. So my prediction is Charles Oliveira to defeat Cub Swanson by submission. Up next, we're in the UFC's light heavyweight division as the formerly retired Matt the Hammer Hamill, 11-4-0, battles UFC newcomer Roger the Hulk Hollett, 13-3-0. Originally, this fight was Hollett-Hamill, then Hollett pulled out due to injury. Vladimir Matyushenko stepped in, and now he's had to pull out due to injury, and Hollett's back in. And Vladdy had a chance to interview him for another website I worked for, and I wish him the best in his recovery. Sounds like he has a fairly serious injury, but hopefully we'll see him back in the cage at some point in time. Matt Hamill, prior to retirement, had dropped back-to-back fights against Quentin Rampage Jackson and Alexander Gustafsson, 2 of the elite of the division. Roger Hollett, on the other hand, has won 5 in a row and coming off a Bellator victory over John Hawk. Now, what this fight comes down to for me is Hollett, primarily a striking-based fighter. He's got a boxing background. Matt Hamill, we know about his wrestling skill. He's all about what he's capable of there. Roger Hollett, he's going to need to keep this fight standing, and he's going to need to get inside and really work Hamill over. Matt Hamill's going to have some serious physical advantages, 3 inches of height and 6 inches of reach, which should help him to keep Hollett on the outside. And Hamill has a really nice stabbing jab that he's able to land on opponents to keep them out of range. And in Hollett's last fight against John Hawk, I saw Hawk had a lot of success using his reach and a jab there to keep Hollett on the outside, and that was a split decision in that fight. And simply what it came down to for me as when I watched it is Hawk wasn't able to complete his takedowns and put Hollett on his back, and that's why he lost the decision. I don't think that'll be the case with Matt Hamill. Matt Hamill is a very solid wrestler. We've seen it, and he's very powerful. We've seen him utilize that in a lot of his fights. And simply looking at his fights, in fights he wins, Tito Ortiz, Keith Jardine, Tim Boach, he's able to secure takedowns. The fights he loses, he can't get takedowns. Alexander Gustafsson, Rampage Jackson, Rich Franklin, and of course the quote-unquote victory over John Jones. Either way, I really do not like the skill set matchup here. If I'm in Roger's Hollett's camp, he's going to need to get in, hopefully take advantage of Matt Hamill, a couple of his bad tendencies, which is to be too inactive on his feet and to hold his hands low. But I think when he moves in, Hamill will look for takedowns, and I expect Matt Hamill to secure just enough takedowns and do just enough of the striking to keep Hollett on the outside to win the striking advantages and nullify any technical skills that Hollett will have in this fight. So my prediction for this matchup is Matt Hamill to defeat Roger Hollett by decision. Our next prediction is in the UFC middleweight division, and it's a fight I'm very much looking forward to as Michael the Count Bisping, 23-4-0, battles the All-American Brian Stann, 12-4-0, with the winner of this fight most likely staring a title shot in the face at the conclusion. Now, taking a look at Michael Bisping, he's coming off a loss to Chael Sonnen. It was preceded by 4 consecutive wins, while Brian Stann, a victory over Alessio Sakara, his last loss also in the fight prior to that, submission loss against Chael Sonnen. Now, in any fight that involves Michael Bisping, we always hear and talk. You hear a lot of smack talk. You see it posted on the internet. I think he's doing a little more in this fight than he has done in previous fights, at least. And I think that's very interesting. And of course, a lot of people like to counter the Michael Bisping smack talk with that the little GIF of him getting knocked out by Dan Henderson, which is always entertaining to watch, even though I am a Michael Bisping fan. But either way, lots of online stuff to talk about with this fight. But let's talk about the ground game first. Brian Stann notoriously has issues with grapplers. We saw him get submitted by Chael Sonnen. He got submitted by Phil Davis at light heavyweight. He's had issues there, and opponents know, even Mike Macenzio had success taking him down. Opponents know if they can get Brian Stann to the ground, it negates his striking power, and he has vulnerabilities. Greg Jackson has been working to tie those up and fix those. Michael Bisping, on the other hand, not a natural wrestler, but he's developed some solid wrestling skills. He does a nice job setting him up with his hands and using his quickness to really get in and take his opponents down. He even took Chael Sonnen down in the last fight, which was very impressive. Takedown accuracy, 51%, so it's a solid number. His takedown defense is 62%, which is even better, but I don't expect to see Brian Stann shooting on Bisping or attempting to put him on his back much in this fight unless he's able to knock him down with his hands. So if Bisping's able to utilize that and focuses mainly on ground game, that's a good place he could win, a good way he could win this fight. But I expect, again, as I said, Greg Jackson will be working on with Brian Stann to try and shore these issues up. Now, this fight should be primarily contested on the feet. Michael Bisping, 14 wins by knockout, 14 of his 22 wins by knockout, which is an impressive number. Brian Stann, equally as impressive, if not more. Of his 12 victories, 9 of them have come by knockout. And his last, 3 wins have all come by knockout over Sakara, Santiago, and Lieben. So big numbers there. Now, technically speaking, Michael Bisping has a significant advantage. He's got a far more diverse tool of weapons to deal with. He's a faster fighter. As I said, he's more technical. He does a nice job navigating the outside of the cage and picking away his opponents. And beating them up, and that's what he has the ability to do here. He averages 4.59 strikes per minute compared to Stann's 3.08. So if this fight goes 15 minutes, that's going to be an advantage for Michael Bisping big time. And his striking defense, 71%, which means people have a hard time finding Bisping and landing strikes, which is a huge issue, again, if this fight is contested on the feet. Brian Stann, on the other hand, a far more simplistic striker. He has been stopped by knockout once, which was by Steve Cantwell. But on the feet, he throws a lot of 1-2s and follows it up with a kick, but he's developing his striking, and that's, but something here, he's not going to want to match technique with technique against Bisping. The thing he has to look at Michael Bisping, Bisping's only been knocked out once in his career, and of course, by Dan Henderson, but we have seen him several times in the Dennis Kang fight, in the Yoshihiro Akiyama fight, in the Vanderlei Silva fight. We've seen him clipped, hurt, and in trouble as a result of getting caught, especially with that overhand right hand. And I was, looking at this fight, and I came across some very interesting numbers. In his wins at middleweight, his opponent's KO victory rate, the guys he's beaten, is 39%, which is fairly low, and that number should be lower, but it's bolstered by an 80% knockout victory rate by Jorge Rivera and Chris Lieben, who guys he was able to outpoint and work away and avoid the knockout. In his losses, at middleweight to Vanderlei Silva and Dan Henderson, their knockout rate 59%. Which doesn't sound that much higher, but Dan Henderson has a lot of decisions, because remember, he was Decision Dan at one point. That number could be significantly higher, and just for comparison's sake, Brian Stann, 75% knockout rate. So what I'm trying to say here is that Michael Bisping does far better when he knows there isn't a threat of knockouts. Guys like against Jason Day and Charles McCarthy, against Dan Miller and Jason Miller, he's able to sit down in his punches and have success because he knows those guys aren't the type of guys who have the power to hurt him. Same thing against Chael Sonnen. I know it was a loss, but Sonnen's not a knockout guy. He's not a one-punch knockout fighter, and Bisping knows that and was able to sit down, capitalize, and do well. I expect he's going to have issues here. Against both Vanderlei Silva and Dan Henderson, those are tailor-made opponents for Bisping to beat because they're simplistic strikers or brawlers in Silva's case whose cardio is questionable, and Bisping should have been able to point fight them, avoid them, wait till they slow down and maybe go after them at the end of the fight when they've really gassed themselves out. But instead, he was so concerned about the threat of power, of their knockout power, he didn't sit down on the strikes, and he spent a great deal of time running away in those fights and lost them both. Especially in the Dan Henderson one, if you go back and watch that, whenever Henderson put pressure on him, he was backpedaling, backing up, and really struggling. And if you see Michael Bisping reaching behind him, looking for that fence, that's an indication that he's concerned and he's looking for room to escape to and back up, and that's something means he's not fighting his game plan, and that's what I expect Brian Stann to do. Stann, like other fighters, I expect him, just like Akiyama did, just like even Jorge Rivera had success, and just like Dennis Kang, he's going to be able to catch Bisping in an exchange, and he's going to hurt him. And I think that's what this fight's going to come down to. And even if he doesn't, I expect Bisping to be very much off his game because he's concerned with the power, like he was against Silva and Henderson. I think, Dan's got a very powerful right hand, the H-bomb, but I think Brian Stann is a more technically gifted fighter. His conditioning is better, and his speed should be not up to par with Bisping, but good enough to keep up with him. And I think this is an upset in the making, and I think Brian Stann has the tools to pull it off. So my prediction is Brian Stann to defeat Michael Bisping by knockout. Our fourth prediction of the evening is in the UFC 152 main event, as the first ever UFC Flyweight champion will be crowned as Joseph Benavidez, 16-2-0, battles Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, 15-2-1. Looking at what they've done recently, Benavidez coming off that win over Yasuhiro Urashitani in the semifinals of this mini flyweight tournament. He did that by knockout. Demetrious Johnson, it took him 2 fights to eventually get by Ian McCall, the first being a draw that Johnson was initially given the win, the second being a far more decisive decision victory for Ian McCall. Win total-wise, Johnson, 3 by knockout, 6 by submission, 6 by decision. He has 2 losses by decision, 1 to Dominic Cruz when he battled for the Bantamweight title, and 1 to Brad Pickett when he made his WEC debut. Joseph Benavidez, on the other hand, similar numbers, 4 wins by knockout, 8 wins by submission, 4 wins by decision, and his 2 losses also against Dominic Cruz, both back in WEC, 1 not for the title, 1 for the title. Either way, these are 2 talented fighters, and I expect they will be some of the most dominant guys at 125 in the UFC for a long time. Now, looking at the grappling game first, Joseph Benavidez comes out of the alpha male camp, and he's a pretty decent ground fighter. As I said, 8 wins by submission, and he has one of the techniques I really like to see him do when he's able to clinch on his opponent, start dragging him to the ground. He's able to tie up their legs and grapevine them, and that helps them to offer some control. Demetrious Johnson, on the other hand, another very talented fighter. He has excellent speed. If you want to see how quick this guy is and how effective his takedowns can be, go back to that fight with Kid Yamamoto, and even that matchup with Miguel Torres, where he's able to shoot, take guys down at just a ridiculous rate, and it was very impressive. And he did that again against Ian McCall in the second fight, which really I think was the difference. He was able to break McCall's will with his speed and takedown skills. Statistically, on the ground, interesting numbers, and the edge goes to Johnson in this. Takedowns average per fight, Johnson 3.3 against only 1.5 for Joseph Benavidez. But this is the big number that shows up to me. Johnson, 54% takedown accuracy success rate. Joseph Benavidez, only 25%, which indicates to me he does not have a lot of success completing takedowns at the initial attempt. Either way. Now, looking at some numbers that further back that up, Joseph Benavidez in his last fight against where he had a significant grappling advantage, only completed 1 takedown on 5 attempts, which is a concern. Against Eddie Wineland, he was 0 for 6. Against Dominic Cruz in those combined 2 fights, he was 0 for 12. So he certainly has issues in those fights getting opponents to the ground. The last time we saw him have a lot of success with takedowns was against Ian Loveland. He did complete 5 takedowns, but it took him a ridiculously high 17 attempts. So Benavidez, even though he has a grappling background, his transition to the wrestling game, his wrestling transition to MMA, not as nearly as effective as a guy like Demetrious Johnson, who has a lot of takedowns, and we've seen him hit some big-time numbers. Now, on the feet, Benavidez' power. As I said, we saw him in his last fight with the knockout against Eddie Wineland, a very talented striker. He was able to catch him, counter him, and cut him up with some strikes, which was very solid. He's got some nice low kicks, which he leads with. But his striking technique, he's got power, but his technique, to me, he slices with his hands a little bit, and I think he comes up short, and that's not something you want to be doing, especially against a guy like Demetrious Johnson. Johnson's going to have a significant speed advantage as far as I'm concerned. He doesn't have the big knockout power of Benavidez, but technically speaking, he's the superior striker, and the big thing that Johnson has that could almost be as important as knockout power is that volume of strikes. He averages 3.11 strikes per minute, and a big thing with Johnson in his WEC UFC career, in every single fight he's ever fought in, he always lands more than his opponent, and that includes his loss to Dominic Cruz, which is impressive because Cruz puts up some high numbers. So Johnson always lands more strikes on his opponent than his opponent hits on him. That's because Johnson is so quick. The threat of the takedown is a real one. His opponents have to deal with that. He does a nice job with his footwork and his angles, getting in, getting out, landing big flurries of combinations, throwing some leg kicks in there. Johnson's a dangerous striker, but he's going to need to be very careful of Joseph Benavidez' power when Demetrious does come forward looking to engage. Now, again, interesting fight. Benavidez is the favorite in this matchup, the betting favorite, but I see some numbers that have me leaning towards Demetrious Johnson, and I'll tell you why. As I said, Demetrious Johnson, in every single fight he fights in, he outpoints his opponent with striking, which is significant. In the fights he's lost, or very close, it came down to the takedowns. In his debut loss against Brad Pickett, Pickett was able to complete 10 takedowns. In his loss against Dominic Cruz was able to complete 10 takedowns. In his draw against Ian McCall that I actually felt he lost, McCall was able to complete 4 or 5 takedown attempts and control him on the ground. And that's a big issue as far as I can see in this fight. Because Joseph Benavidez, I don't see him being able to outpoint Demetrious Johnson, and he doesn't seem to have the takedown skills, 25% takedown accuracy, and like I said, we haven't really seen him dominate with his takedown abilities, and Benavidez is like a guy who likes to stand in front of his opponent and exchange. Johnson's not going to do that, which is going to make Johnson's angles and speed and movement is going to make it very hard for Benavidez to get in, get a takedown on a guy like Johnson. And in Demetrious, actually, these guys are going to be very similar in size, which will be interesting because, again, even in the Ian McCall fight, Johnson was an undersized fighter, which, did not help. But here they're going to be very similar in size, and Johnson's actually going to have an inch of reach, which will help him out in the striking and maintaining distance. But either way, I like what Johnson brings with his striking, and he might mix in his own takedown here or there, but I can see him winning this fight solely on the basis of his striking output and Benavidez not being able to catch up with him. Benavidez is going to need an above average of performance from his grappling game to counteract Johnson's striking and speed. And when it comes right down to it, unless Joseph Benavidez can catch Johnson with a knockout strike and stop him, I don't see him doing this fight. So I'm going to take Demetrious Johnson to defeat Joseph Benavidez and become the new UFC Flyweight champion, and I'm going to take him by decision. In our main event of the evening, Jon Bones Jones, the UFC light heavyweight champion, puts his title on the line against Vitor the Phenom Belfort, a former multi-divisional champion. Jones won the title back at UFC 128 against Shogun Rua. He's defeated Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, and Rashad Evans, all former champions in his title reign. The guy is on an amazing roll and has won 7 in a row. Vitor Belfort, on the other hand, coming off back-to-back wins over Anthony Johnson and Yoshihiro Akiyama, one by submission, one by KO. Both those were fought at middleweight. And his last loss came at UFC 126 when he fought Anderson Silva for the UFC middleweight title, first round front kick loss. Now, I commend Vitor Belfort for taking this fight. He's not a light heavyweight. Hasn't fought at light heavyweight since 2007. So all the props for him stepping up and taking this fight when other guys are either injured or unwilling to take the fight matchup. Either way, good for him on that. And I'm not wishing any ill will towards Jon Jones like a lot of people are because of the UFC 151 situation. It's partially his fault, but not nearly like people are saying. Check out my poll on the website and voice your opinion there. Now, physically, as is the case in most of his fights, Jon Jones has physical advantages over his opponent. 4 inches of height and 10.5 inches of reach in this case, which will play out big. Vitor Belfort, we know what the guy's all about. 14 of his 21 wins have come by knockout, and that's what he needs to do here. His last 4 wins all have finished inside the first round. Matt Lindland, Rich Franklin, Yoshihiro Akiyama, and his submission win over Anthony Johnson. He needs to get this fight over with quickly, and he basically needs to rush Jon Jones. That's what he needs to do. He needs to get in, use his 2 things he has going for him. Potentially, should be expected superior speed both in his footwork and his hands and his knockout power, and put hands on Jon Jones' chin and knock him out. Now, people have talked about, well, Jon Jones, how will he react to being hit? He's been hit now. Lyoto Machida hit him. Rashad Evans hit him. Ryan Bader hit him, what seems like forever ago, and he's taken those shots, so he certainly has a chin, and it's been tested. Now, the big thing, Jon Jones, the last time we saw him have, Evans had some success against him, but the last time we saw Jon Jones really have issues was in the opening round against Lyoto Machida. And everybody says, well, Machida's a talented striker, so's Belfort. I see issues there. Well, I don't. The reason I don't see issues there is Machida is a distance fighter. He does very well from the outside and plays that distance game effectively. And that's what Jon Jones, where his success comes, his ability to fight from the, keep at range and pick it and work his opponent in a setup that they can't hit him. Well, Machida had no problem with that. Vitor Belfort, not so much. Vitor, like we saw against Akiyama, against Belfort, against all these guys, needs to get in close and land lightning fast strikes. But unfortunately, whenever he gets in close, that's where the issue is going to be, is Jon Jones will tie him up, will clinch him, and will do damage there. Now, looking back at the Vitor Belfort-Anthony Johnson fight, Anthony Rumble Johnson had a lot of success bullying Vitor around, putting him on his back and controlling him there. Some quick stand-ups there potentially helped Vitor out, and of course Johnson gassing certainly helped Vitor out in that fight. Jon Jones, he's not going to gas. And I expect him to do the opposite. Vitor Belfort is the type of guy who's going to actually have conditioning problems, and I expect if this fight goes beyond 1 round, Vitor is going to be in a whole world of trouble in that sense. Jon Jones can fight from distance and keep out of Vitor's range, which is a huge advantage for him. Use those kicks, use a lot of the techniques he can use to keep Vitor from getting in and landing his power strikes. But at the same time, Jon Jones can go the other way with this. He can use his leverage and power and strength, push Vitor into the cage, clinch up with him, drop some elbows, put him on the mat, and beat him up and control him, much like he did against Shogun Rua. And that's actually the route I expect him to go. He's going to try and neutralize Vitor's power and speed by taking it away entirely, keeping him on the wall, and eventually putting him on his back, forcing Vitor to carry Jones's big, heavy frame and beat him up. And, of course, we know Belfort's best chance of winning this fight is to land a knockout blow. It's very difficult to knock a guy out when A, you're on your back, or B, you're being pushed into the cage. Not impossible, as we've seen it a couple times, but certainly the percentages drop off the table huge when you're in those positions. Again, I give Vitor's a big underdog, and I give him all the props in the world for taking this fight, but stylistically, size-wise, and stylistically, he does not match up well with Jon Jones. Basically, he needs to use power and speed, but I think Jon Jones will negate that almost right away. I think look for Jon Jones to come out and try and reestablish himself and show what he's capable of, especially coming off that Rashad Evans fight, where basically he said he lacked some killer instinct, and he was looking to change that here. Either way, I think he has the ability to win this fight almost every time it gets played out. Obviously outside of Belfort catching him with a big flash knockout. Either way, I like Jon Jones here to retain his title, so my prediction is Jon Jones to defeat Vitor Belfort, and I'm going to say it by TKO. So those are my main card predictions for UFC 152. All of my preliminary picks will be in written form over at the website. I know there's going to be at least one person who posts in the comments, where are your prelims? They're at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Check them out. You can also see the prediction panel over at kamikazeoverdrive.net and all their picks over there. And consider buying my bet pack, $10. Again, I've had a lot of success lately winning money, so jump on that. I've got some underdogs on this card, so you want to take a look and see where I rank those underdogs and some other matches that I talk about on this card and how I actually feel they play out as far as the betting situation goes. That's something you want to take a long look at. And at the very least, there'll be some prizes given away, and you can check out if you enter your email address and a prize and your name gets drawn out, you'll get a t-shirt or some other swag sent your way. So definitely consider investing there. And finally, if you're an NFL fan, head over to kamikazeoverdrive.net. Check out the NFL section. I've got some prediction guys, some very intelligent guys who've worked in the business for a long time, and they're breaking down the games every week, putting up some free plays, putting up some bet packs. But either way, lots of predictions going on at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Feels good to be back in business and talking about a UFC event or a Strikeforce is also on the horizon. And make sure you tune into the next broadcast where I attempt to break down UFC on Fuel TV, Struve versus Miocic. Thank you very much for listening. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions.